All right. Thank you all for joining. This is the fourth meeting in the direction of getting URI URL standards moving towards final. A quick recap from the last meeting. In the last meeting, Key explained EIP 4804 with a slides presentation. Greg, who is unfortunately not able to join this meeting today, he had some question in the last meeting about this proposal, like what would be the biggest benefit, what's the main problem that the author is trying to solve, etc. So he recommended to reach out to decentralized projects for support and wider adoption. And in response, we see a comment added to agenda. We hope to hear about it, the progress on proposal 4804 in a bit. In the last meeting, we did not get any update on EIP 2400, but luckily we have the author here in this call. So hopefully we will have some update from the team on that part. And also a few weeks ago, a Discord user, Trizania, shared thoughts on this URL URI meeting format. That was added in the last meeting agenda, but we could not get to that. We ran out of time. So maybe we can start from that. I'm hoping that it will be a quick item to cover. So Trey, welcome.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
So I'm sort of coming at this from a perspective of like a distant observer. But after reading some of the Uri specification proposals, some of them like definitely are needed in that they're very general and like you need to have some kind of common denominator there, but I'm worried about presenting like a useful specification for wallet developers to be able to present to users like enough information so that they understand what a certain app is actually requesting them do. So I'm suggesting that we should try to aim to have higher level URL specifications that do more like high level actions, like for example, specifically requesting a payment in terms of a certain asset type, certain destination address within whatever rollup or whatever, and quantity, instead of sort of doing in terms of like low level, call this function on this contract on this chain, because saying a high level, I want to be paid this amount here, is much easier for a wallet to understand what it's supposed to do than saying call this function on this contract, whatever. So if you have a higher level concept like that, it makes it easier. So like the example I gave in the doc that I wrote up is, say you have funds on Polygon, but someone wants to receive them on Arbitrum. If you just say, call this function on this contract on Arbitrum, a wallet could go and figure out what that function is going to end up doing. But that requires extra heuristics, which makes it more difficult to implement the standards. And so, and there's cases where you could get it wrong, like, oh, you think you're going to be doing this one thing, but you actually end up doing another thing. So if you have a higher level standard, then it forces everyone to think in terms of those higher levels, including the wallet developers. And also, since the other point that I wanted to include is from the Lightning Network specifications, one of the challenges is sort of similar, where they have lots of different kinds of binary data they want to communicate to users in a concise format. And so I'm worried about misusing URLs generally and trying to hack them to communicate this data when it's kind of inefficient and clunky. So what the Lightning invoice format did is it's all just binary. The entire thing is just a binary representation, and it's pretty compact. And then you encode it in an opaque format called Bec32. And so that can be turned into a URL just by prefixing Lightning on it, and it's fine, and it works like that. But I don't think tying ourselves to encoding the data directly in the URL format is like really worth the cost of the added complexity and clunkiness. And thinking about like, oh, maybe we should just be communicating this data in a more opaque way that's harder to misuse, and just saying everyone just rely on the library to decode it instead of, trying to do it themselves. I think that is probably a better approach. But I'm just some guy, so I don't know what other people's thoughts on that are, or if anyone's looked at that. But that's basically all I had to say, I think, unless anyone has questions.
Interesting. Okay. I feel like I can agree with you on the encoding data as a more of an opaque chunk, right? Because I feel like with the current URL specs, having written one of them, it is kind of frustrating to have to somehow try and make it fit into the whole HTTP like URL version, right? Where the original EIP, I don't have the number in my head real quick, but there's an EIP that essentially describes Ethereum : whatever. And then we've kind of just started attaching prefixes and adding payloads and then defining that whole payload section, but making it look similar every time. And there's a bunch of discrepancies there. So I feel like I can understand with that. I do not think I can fully agree or get behind the idea of the vagueness there. Like, I understand you'd want to be able to do send funds to address X on Arbitrum or on Polygon or on zkSync or whatever, right? But I feel like the more explicit variant, if we could encode it in some better way, like a little more low level, would be better because again, like the creator of such URL or of such URL that might potentially be in a QR code or in something along those lines, right, is usually trying to tell the wallet to do action X and to do it this exact way, right? And if you give the wallet more freedom of interpretation, so an example of that would be MetaMask's current implementation of the 681 spec, right? Where they're only taking parts, like certain parameters they accept, certain parameters they just don't filter for, and they kind of just ignore, which means we have different results on each wallet. I feel like if we clearly just said, this is the payload, this is the address, this is the function, this is the amount and gas, go, that would be a lot better than if we said, here's a somewhat version of do action X, do that, where the wallet still gets some decisions, right? Because then it will be, you might have different behavior depending on the wallet. You feel what I'm saying?
Yeah, and so I agree that like wallets need to be able to do whatever, like so two parts, right? Like I agree, like having an explicit format where you say specifically sign this blob of data to this contract to do whatever, but like if you're like a hardware wallet and you have like relatively limited access to the chain to decide what you're supposed to do, and like if the hardware wallet just presents you like, hey, do you want to sign this blob of hex, it's kind of hard for you to understand what that blob of hex might do. So if you have a high level presentation of what it's doing, saying like, oh, do you want to transfer funds here to here to here, it's easier for the wallet to figure out what to do than if it has this blob of data and needs to somehow like communicate back to the host, and then that communicates to the chain to try to figure out what it's actually doing. So it makes it harder for it to present a richer interface to the user.
Okay.
Especially like if you have a limited thing there. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I have a question. So this URL URI working group is all about all types of URLs, not just the receipt URLs. So
not just the receipt one that you authored, correct?
Okay.
Because you're the author of 2400, correct?
Yeah.
For transaction receipts, right? So, Trey, I don't know how much you've read up on the URL standards that there are right now, because there are quite a few, and they're quite some places overlap, some places there's discrepancies. But an example would be like 2400, which, Ricardo, correct me if I say anything wrong, but is for receipts. So if somebody were to click that URL or open the URL in an app or scan the QR code or whatever, they are taken, or at least the idea is that they would be taken to a screen that shows you the overview of that specific transaction and what happened there, whether that be cached on the device or fetched from on-chain. So that is kind of like one of the higher level actions. We have an add chain URL. We have a initiate transaction URL, which is pretty arbitrary already, but it does fit in a certain like pattern, right? The HTTP pattern I mentioned before. So it would be nicer if we could take all of these actions, which are kind of like a mix between high level and low level, Because like a high level interaction is the view the transactions, for example, where like it is fully up to the wallet to say, oh, hey, this function name was transfer, so it was probably a transfer. And this contract is ERC20, so it's probably an ERC721, and I should show the custom UI for that. Sorry, an ERC20, so I should probably show the custom UI for that, right?
I might be misunderstanding the use case of 2400, but my understanding is it's mainly for presenting information about transactions that already occurred, right?
Correct. That's 2400. Yes.
Yeah. So my concern was more about with URLs that like a dApp would give a wallet to say, I want you to sign this transaction or cause this event to occur on chain. So like I haven't read all of the URL specs, but like high level actions like 2400, like, yeah, that's definitely good. And it's like much more unambiguous about what is actually presenting. So yeah, I just want to like ensure that people like extend that thought process to like common like payment requests, I think are like the current like URLs that are available for them kind of clunky. Sorry, go ahead.
I think that a good analogy to what we have now in Web 2 is we have post requests. So these transactions request should be something like a transaction request. But of course, we are not sending it to the server. We are sending it to the client to authenticate it. So it's the two totally different UX, but the tools, these URLs and URIs are tools that the developers of the apps and wallets would use to coordinate what they want to do. Of course, that the main concern that we always have is that people can exploit this to ask for to fool the user somehow, some phishing, I don't know, but that I think that the whole is much deeper there, and we are trying to fix that with decentralized storage and other processes that, for example, the governance and DAOs and all sorts of stuff to make so the user knows that a system is audited. And yeah, I think that URLs and URIs are very important, and they can be useful tools. I agree with you that there are other ways we can do with that, but the proposal here is actually to standardize everything, so the wallets can be consistent across each other, at least in the important things.
On that note, there is a library made by Bruno Barr, Bruno Barr 79, previously worked at MetaMask, now works at Rainbow. The library is a little out of date now. I've made a couple pull requests to it, which are like, we got through reviewing them, but then if I recall correctly, Bruno went on vacation or something. So they haven't been merged, so they've been open for a month. But those additions would add support for 2400, for 5094, and better support for 681. And currently MetaMask and Rainbow, as of my knowledge, both use this library, and I'm sure that there's probably a few other wallets out there. Let's see, I have, there you go, that's the pull request. And if you press that back to the code section, that's the library as a whole. Probably send a link to my fork, shouldn't I? Let's have a look. And some of the documentation has been redone, but not fully. And the idea there is that we now have one library that is now used across several wallets. So we could like a lot more easily make a developer experience where as soon as we actually make such a payload, right, such as you suggested, Trey, where we're not stuck to this HTTP spec, but we're more like the first couple bits define the action, the second couple bits, whatever, right? Like that sense. And be able to do it a lot more compact. We'll be able to add that into the library here and then get every wallet to upgrade their packages and build their own UIs accordingly. But at least they'll have one standard way to do it, right? And we won't have to rebuild support across 20 different platforms.
That's great. Yeah, I didn't read through the PR, but it's good that there's
no worries,
like a standard package for it. I'm not saying like, oh, you're not trying to do any of these things right now. I just want to make sure that people understand like my perspective on it as someone that might be building a wallet in the future that wants to do
Okay.
like aggressive cross-chain. I have another document that I was working on describing like I have some comments about the current state of wallets. So, but that's not ready to be shared yet. So I might have more
Right.
discussion give you later.
So now that you've sparked the thought of like the way that Lightning does it, right? Because you mentioned something about that. I thought back to reading the spec for how the Lightning QRs work, and like, what is it, BIP? I don't know, something like that. One of the BIPs. About the actual like how Bitcoin and Lightning do their QR code URLs, and I honestly would have to agree that, you know, if we can make it smaller, we should. Because the only hurdle here is the wallet, and the wallet is the one interpreting the action and actually figuring out what to do with it, right? So I suppose that makes me an advocate for rewriting the current URL specs we have if we could, and make them more compact in a sense. What are you guys' thoughts on that? How about you, Ricardo?
Okay. I just wanted to have some questions about the ERC 2400.
Mhm.
So I noticed that might have a use case where the wallet is the receiver of the transaction is offline or doesn't want the transaction to be automatically submitted for some reason. So perhaps, I don't know if it should be included, or maybe it's another URL standard of the raw transaction. So instead of publishing the transaction and delivering the hash, the app could deliver the signed transaction back instead of automatically submitting it. I don't know if this should be considered, but yeah, that's the only thing that I found here that I might add in this standard. But I really believe that should be another standard and only develop it with if really people here think that it's an important use case.
I think if we wanted to go such a way, if we make some kind of rewritten, like pure compact data, right, opaque data, URL format, where we are like making a transaction request, we could probably literally take all that data, change one bit around to now signify that it is a receipt, and then the wallet should just be able to read it with the exact same code. And instead of showing it as a, hey, please make this transaction, they'll show it as a, hey, this user made a transaction. I think the only field we'd have to add, or maybe add, would be the sender address, right? Because in a use case here, one could send it to somebody else saying, hey, this is the transaction I'm going to make, right? But then again, you're stuck with whether or not the transaction would be valid and actually went through.
No,
right?
the sender address is you can retrieve through the signature, because the raw transaction contains all the data and the signature to that transaction. So you only need, you would be just replacing, instead of putting a hash of the transaction, would be to put the raw transaction there. But yeah, it's there is a lot of constraints on that. So I feel that I should not add this use case here. So just to keep it simple, right?
Right. But if we're going to do something like rewrite the entire idea of URLs, right? And try and make these, I mean, my brain really here is thinking about QR codes, because we want to keep them as small and readable, as low detail as possible, right? Because that improves camera usability, etc., and a lot of things for users. How would we go about that? Should we, I mean, I'm sure we probably don't want to write an entire EIP during this call, but I'm sure we could come up with some ideas, right? Let's say we started writing such an EIP. What would be key things? Do we designate a certain amount of bits? Do we take any inspiration from the way Lightning does it? What do you guys think?
So I think that there is a simple way would be to have a standard that would specify a compact version of all the other URLs. So in the same format that you have JSON versus BSON, that is binary standard object. You have the JavaScript notation object, so on. It's just a compressed version. And maybe you can even use another compression algorithms, like, for instance, 7-zip, I don't know, anything
Right.
that we wanted. And then, yeah, we can do that.
In Lightning, the way it, if anyone hasn't read Bolt 11, it's, you have, they're structured as like a tag, which is a byte, or a 6-bit type, I think, and then a length that's a few more bits, and then there's a number of bytes that follow that, which is the actual payload. And so there's a standardized list of types, and most of the payloads are all just binary blobs anyways. And so that's kind of the most efficient way that you can do it without introducing ambiguity and like requiring parsers to be smarter than necessary. So a few of the types are obviously like destination pub key. There's a couple different like route hints, which is a Lightning specific thing. There's a purpose field that you can have. In this case, we probably don't need that, but and then obviously like quantity. So for what I think you would want for like a payment request in this case, are the same basic ones about destination address and quantity and asset type. But as far as like optional fields, like which rollups to say like, oh, well, I want to use this particular rollup as the destination space, or maybe we could have multiple instances of that where we could say like any of these particular different rollups you can send it to me on, and I'd like decide that that's like a valid place to send the funds. So that sort of expands the possibility to like, I don't know how you would represent that in a URL in an elegant way. And since it's already like in the byte format, it's all binary, you don't need to worry about extra compression, since it's all probably just hashes or pub keys anyways, those don't compress. And so you don't really get any inefficiencies there when you try to encode it into the Bec32. So I think using something like BSON would be, or any kind of binary JSON would add a lot of like extra fluff to it that would make it less efficient.
Okay, let's chat about if we want to make it more compact, right? And you think BSON's not going to cut it. I have the Bolt 11. I sent the link in the chat. There we go. Difference between JSON and BSON as well. For different providers, right? For different layer 2s and rollups, etc. Would we store that as chain ID? Do we need more data than just the specific rollup? Like, will there need to be some kind of extra information depending on the rollup? And do we need some place to store that? Do we want to get together at some point and write this together, or do we want just somebody to come up with a? Because I'm totally down to sit down and try and write a Bolt 11 like payment encoding system for Ethereum, or at least a system that will be able to expand to not just doing payments, but also a variant of 2400 and a variant of 5094 and a variant of 681, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Should we do these as different?
Yeah, we can. I think that would be the best, because then you have standards or compressed standards, and then you can go adding as time goes on. As more URLs appear, you just append there.
Yep.
And it's just.
And we give them a number. So we'll have something like, do we want to stick with the Ethereum colon prefix then as well? Because that might add some ambiguity between the URLs.
Yeah, I'm not like in favor of it. I just inherited from other URL standards.
Yes. Okay, so you're also not do you Ricardo, let me rephrase that. Do you agree with the fact that the current way that we're doing our URLs is a little clunky because of the whole staying in the HTTP theme?
Yeah, I agree, but I kind of like that it's kind of user readable. But
that is correct.
I mean, like, and when I say see some URLs I can read, and I like user readable URLs, and that's a technique on web development. But I don't like when I have a URL that is a lot of clunky data that I don't understand. Of course, the transaction hash is impossible to hide, but yeah, what else we can do to make it clear that it's an Ethereum transaction to anyone that reads that information, and also make it small. So maybe contract Ethereum to eat. Don't know.
I mean, yeah, that could save some characters. I think the way that Bolt 11 is doing it, if I'm not mistaken, is they're going like the ultimate minimum character route, where they're putting like LNBC as a prefix. So it's LNBC, then it's 1 as a bec32 separator. So LNBC 1 is the beginning of all of their things, and then there's a timestamp. There's a payment secret, like all this stuff gets encoded, and they just put a character, then a bunch of stuff, and then another character, or a character and then length, and then a bunch of stuff. Yeah, but that makes it not human readable.
Do you agree that the URLs should be elegant?
I think it's a tough one, because if we make the URLs elegant, we can't make them compact most of the time, right?
No. For example, why use like a number as a separator? Why not use like a dash or 2 dots? I don't know.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair. But like for the current example, which really frustrates me about 681, in the HTTP spec, when query parameters have the same key, so if I have like some URL $hello equals foo and buy equals bar, then that would work, and it would convert that to an object where hello equals foo and buy equals bar. But if I make hello happen twice, it will only take whatever the library decides, first one or last one, right? And the problem with that is that in 681, what's happening is we're using the type of the argument as the key and the order of the keys as the order in which the arguments appear in on the function, which makes it super difficult to actually parse, and like requires a bunch of weird JavaScript fiddling around to be able to parse query parameters, because any normal query parameter parsing library breathe filters out the duplicates, which is why like Bruno Bar's library had some issues initially. And apparently no wallet ever tested a QR code or a URL with different parameters, but fine, I guess, or overlapping parameters. So that it does make it a little more confusing to write. I'm referring to EIP 681. Yes, correct. I think a URL to that is in the chat. Otherwise, I can drop you one as well if you want.
So maybe the suggestion would be to not use them as parameters, but as like.
Well, there's no space left in the URL then, right? Or as path, but the path is
Like,
already taken up by the function name.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So it's a little difficult in the HTTP spec, and then 1594, which is like co-authored by me, is a spec for adding chains through URLs, and that becomes difficult as well because you end up just shoving everything in query parameters and overlapping query parameters. Take care, Victor. Right, which makes it very difficult, and eventually you end up with a super long URL that doesn't look that pretty either. And like readability disappears as well because the browser, when you hover over URLs, shortens them.
Yeah, but shouldn't the spec makes invalid the URLs that have duplicate parameters?
I mean, the spec makes it valid, but that means that like there's no library ever that assumed they were valid because HTTP deems them invalid. The original HTTP spec. So all the query string parsing libraries fail at parsing them correctly.
I see.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
I have a question about that 2400 discussion here. Are we currently even planning to move ahead with the 2400 in the present format, or are we considering it to stay as is and come up with a new proposal with the improvement that we are discussing?
So I can just I just have to make the commit to last call, right? That you said if I want to move forward on it, but I don't know if it should go to last call, because I see that there is a lot of discussions. But if we plan to like make a compact version of the URLs, then I think that we can stick how it is now, and maybe later we figure out this problem of maybe these formats can be temporary until we that's the thing. We want to wait more to discuss, or do we want to implement it how it is?
So just a correction here to make sure that this proposal, I mean, like you and your co-author are interested in moving ahead this proposal, you do not have to move it to last call, because last call is a stage where when proposal is all ready and we are only waiting for 14 days to get it merged towards final. So the best thing for you to do right now would be to move it to the review status. That will help all EIP editors add more comments toward the proposal in the present form. And that will also like invite community reviews. This will give you the time that you are looking for. And after a certain period of time, if you decide to move it forward, then we can move it to the last call.
So should I put in the status of the EIP as review?
That's right.
Okay, then I should just send the pull request.
Yeah, that would be
Okay,
good.
thank you.
And yeah, Luke, as we are discussing that there could be some improvement that we can probably use in the direction of creating a better proposal. In my personal opinion, please correct me, someone. It should not stop any other proposal moving towards final, which are already existing and has certain use cases. So we can both work in parallel.
I liked 2400 in its current state. I've written the library to read 2400 in its current state, and as soon as that gets merged, the world, well, as soon as the major wallets upgrade, but the world, will be able to use 2400 all across the board. However, we are, as discussed a second ago, looking into potentially making a new EIP that would be some composite of the ones we have right now, but would rewrite them in a more compact binary-like format or opaque format to an extent. The specifics of what this format would look like is, I don't think we've fully thought about or decided on yet. So more information is needed for that, I suppose.
Yes.
And I think it might be a good idea for the next meeting to start coming up with some ideas on how we could go about this, and potentially writing some kind of EIP or draft or something in those directions that we can all agree on.
Awesome. So EIP 2400 is already getting support, and you already have written library. So let's keep that proposal moving ahead. And about the proposal that we are discussing now, I think it would be a good idea to maybe start a thread on Fellowship of Ethereum Magician to create a new proposal. We can probably collect some feedback and thoughts over there. And once that is firm enough to be converted into a draft form, maybe you can create the pull request.
Sounds good.
Sound good. Yeah. All right. All good. Well, thank you. I wonder if anyone else has any other comment and feedback on this topic before we can move on to the next proposal. All right. In that case, look, if you create a magician thread, you can maybe share it with us, and I will add it to the next meeting agenda.
Doing it as we speak.
Yeah. Thank you. One other thing, we have another proposal 4804, is it? Yeah, 4804. I think Key is on the call and he has a presentation slides, Google Slides that he had added to the agenda. I'm not sure. Key, would you like to maybe talk about the development or the progress since the last meeting?
Yeah, sure. Can anyone see my screen? So I'll just share. I prepared a few slides because like following the comments from last meeting, especially I think people have some question regarding the applications of what the ERC 4804 is going to do. Here I basically summarize some motivations and applications. And also, I also summarize some updates that I basically since last meeting, roughly 3 weeks ago. So let me move on. So one thing that we feel that is missing in the current Ethereum is like we lack of like decentralized presentation. What it does is basically it can directly locate and render a web content generated on chain. One example that we are seeing more application is going on is the NFT SVG files. For example, we found an ERC4888 that is discussing how we are able to create a composable SVG NFT on top of smart contracts. And also we found a project called Cyberbroker, which they launched a few months ago. We have nothing to do with Cyberbroker. We just thought, oh, this is something interesting application that they are creating an NFT, but they basically upload all the media data, the SVG layers on top of the Ethereum. And then the narrative is that because we have all the data put on chain, so user will never be worried about losing your media files when you buy an NFT. The NFT included in the contract ERC47/2021 together with your media data files is on chain. So when we read this news, we say, oh, this is really interesting application. And so we take a look at their contract and see how it works, especially how they are able to display this on-chain basically generated NFT media files. So we just take a random token ID, then we take a look I think there's a image field here, and we are surprised that actually still using IPFS to tell for example, OpenSea to say, hey, this is the image that you need to display when this basic NFT is displayed. So say, hey, why? So there's also a random method that tells that given a token ID, it will go to their metadata contract. And then in this contract, that basically will have a method that tells that basically they upload all the SVG layers to this contract. And so you have a bunch of layers method. And then there's a way that can actually render the broker. I think there's a method there, random broker. And then you can give a token ID. Then basically it will generate the SVG file in an iterative way. So basically there's a position pointer that tells what's the range of this NFT. So just repeatedly calling this index pointer, and then it will basically render these files one by all the files just like binary and sequentially. And then once it's done, then we have all the NFT that is SVG generated on chain. But unfortunately, since we don't have a way to directly display this content on top of Ethereum, so I guess they have to still rely on IPFS. And so that once IPFS, for example, data is may disappear, then the user has to re-upload this content that's stored on Ethereum and to do so. So this is one thing that I feel like we should have something that can directly point to the basically the web content that generated on Ethereum without using external, for example, services like IPFS or centralized servers. So this is one thing that we feel we can do better. Another thing that we recently noticed Vitaly is writing a blog regarding non-financial usage of blockchain. One part is using the blockchain store as a blog store, and so that I think he has several comments saying that he's maintaining a copy of his blog on IPFS, but it's very slow, and then sometimes it may the files may be drop off, and if that is, for example, able to jump the entire block on top blockchain, and that means you can save the boot problems. One crazy idea is that suppose we are able to dump all the blocks of, for example, website like ENS, Uniswap on the blockchain, but how we are able to locate them and be able to render them in a completely decentralized way. Definitely using, for example, JSON RPC with the curl core or is a scan. It's now an option for users. We need kind of like a way that allows end users to directly access the blocks, access the generated SVGs directly on chain. So this was the major motivation of ERC 4804. Basically, it's a HTTP-like URL to locate we call it Web3 resources that is hosted by a smart contract. So it's very similar to HTTP, which we use the Web3 schema here. And we also just registered this Web3 schema on IANA. And then it has a little bit different, is that you're using the contract as the instead of host, which here we're using the name service from ENS, and then corresponding, it will point to a contract that hosts the Web3 resources instead of like IP address, and it has a bunch of paths that tells to which method to call and what kind of the parameters, which can be also written in name, and also the expected return types, because we have no idea what the contract return type is. If the return type is not given, then it will by default treat this the return will be bytes, and then we will pass it as a web content like SVG or HTML. We also have a gateway that is able to access these URLs, which already installed in my this Firefox, which to support the Web3 link to the gateway link translation. And the purpose of this URL is we do not require a wallet to access the content. So it's basically just putting this URL to the gateway. It's like IPFS, I type something in the gateway, then it will automatically retrieve this data from the blockchain and then return and display random to the browser. So let me give a couple of examples. So for the cyber brokers, we take a look at their contract, and then so we write a simple contract, which basically has one method called random broker with taking a token ID, which will recursively call their method, which is the random method, and then be able to concatenate all the basically binary data they return and return with a single SVG binary data. And then we register, this is cyber brokers, the ENS name and points to this random contract that we deploy. So now with this this thing, now we are able to, using the ERC 4804 to directly, for example, random this SVG directly, so that it translates to a gateway. So I just replace the gateway with F3 and tells, hey, I want to call this contract, its method, and the token ID. Without specifying the return types, then it will treat it as a web content, and the browser will automatically detect this and then display in SVG image format. And so all these things are generated using the smart contract and display directly on the browser. So this is one example. So we hope that with this standard, For the project, they are using the composable SVG on top blockchain. Now they are fully be able to replace the IPFS or any centralized address to the proposed ERC4804 addresses with the corresponding method to how to call the contract and render it in a decentralized way. So this is one application. Another application is a personal blog static website, just like Vitalis blog. So we make an experiment. We download all the Vitalis blogs, including 500 files with 36 megabytes data. Then we upload all the files to a special contract that we create that is able to host these files and their relative, the pathing, all the information, and on Rinkeby testnet. And then we are able to read these files by a format method. That's quite different because we want to support directory structure and absolute relative pathing. So for example, here is the ERC4804 link, which points to the basic special contract that we created, and which will basically goes to the Vitalis homepage that hosted on the Rinkeby. And I can go to the, for example, the article that I just browsed, and that is also basically stored on the blockchain. But here we see that here it goes to the basically additional basic paths that will be passed to the contract, including the core data. And the good thing of this is that it can support relative pathing. So for example, let me see this image. The image in the basically in the original Vitalis file is a relative pathing which contains the parents directory and images and some files. And in the browser, it will automatically basically given this, it will automatically translate according to the URI specification, translate to the corresponding called a protocol specific relative pathing to this link. And this link will also, yes, so it will also be translated to basically core data. So I think Mikhail had questions about this, so about the gas cost. So it will translate to the core data that will basically find the image in the root directory and then display it correctly. So there's one question because saying that there's a gas meter of the how we are there's 23 Ether stored on Ethereum, and that's something also we closely look at several brokers what they have done, and basically one optimization actually we also have done is that is be able to store it using a contract instead of using using the contract and instead of using the storage, local storage. Then it will roughly save roughly 1/3 of the gas cost in just native Ethereum storage case. But definitely we are thinking about in the future, yes, in the future of Ether 2, and then we are able to use in the shorty day blocks, or even with Ethereum, for example, some L2 scaling solutions that we are able to which is friendly for decentralized storage. Then we think we are able to save this cost even dramatically, maybe 1 to 100. Yeah. And so this is something like crazy idea. Say, hey, if suppose now we have a blockchain that is able to have this capacity, now we are able to a lot of interesting applications. So here I would give interesting application is that we are able to create some implication that is more user friendly. That means that the user is able to, for example, read the blocks Yeah, but that means that they either rely on, for example, if we want to save in IPFS, that means we either rely on a centralized server like some Uri XYZ, or we need some CLI like some of what Vitalik is doing. And so here I give example that we are able to create some decentralized applications that without, for example, we usually without using any CI, and also so for example, here I can create a blog, I can upload a blog, and for example, this is my first blog, blog, hello world, which I will basically submit a transaction, and then yeah. So now I am able to have to create this block without just using the wallet, without any other, for example, CI or the other things. And then I can browse it. I'm browsing this block doesn't need any wallet because it can just using the Web3 URL to directly access all the content without any wallet. But if I want to modify this block, then definitely I need to have a wallet that help me to submit a transaction. And then I can, for example, modify it, and this will update to the chain, and then it will call the ERC4804 URL, and then retrieve all this content back. And so with this, we are able to create a lot of these applications without, for example, CLIs. Without, for example, web servers. So a couple of design goals that so it was originally we want to maximum compatible with HTTP so that we can use the same encoding decoding scheme and query fragment that or current HTTP already supporting. One important feature that we want to support is absolute relative pathing, so that we are able to, for example, support composability of these web resources that are including in the defining in the ERC4804. We are hopefully is equipment readable. Actually, this is also a property of HTTP. For example, we are natively supporting the name resolved by name service, currently ENS. We also want to be the simple it's maximum likelihood detection for some common types. It can be integer, and it can be like you in 2056, and you also have the option to accept the full path and query, so that the EVN just serve as a CGI script. The no-go is that we are not planning to sign and submit a transaction, just like EIP6A1's targets. For example, for value, gas limit, gas price, we are not needed in this moment. And so the couple of more details. So for example, right now it has auto mode that to resolve the resources. In auto mode, that the standard will translate the path and the query to a standard solidity counter API method code. For example, it will translate the method and corresponding argument to the corresponding method ID, and then also be able to find the corresponding address to resolve the address from ENS, and then put it together in the core data and to call the contract. And if there is no corresponding return types given, then you will just pass it as web content. Okay, so move forward. So probably I can just go quickly skip this. There's a couple of recent updates in the last 2 weeks. There's a couple of investors, no investors. So the developers are asking the stability of the standard and say whether there's to start a service to support it. And there's also a CASA saying that how we are able to generalize this protocol to multiple chains, like including Solana, including Phantom, others. And then also regarding some namespace reserve assignment for this URL. And then also asking question how we are able to ensure fully trusted access in case gateway is lying, and also how to have some question regarding what the input argument should be, and then how we are able to support additional features like historical data query by adding the block number.
Thank you. Thank you, Key, for sharing all these information. I have a question for you, maybe. I was looking into the discussion to link that is provided here, as you mentioned that there are quite a lot of interest and comments this proposal has received there, but this proposal is also in the draft status.
Yeah.
I wonder if you think that it is ready enough to be like getting more comments, feedback on it. Maybe you would want to move it to the review status.
Sure. Yeah, that's the plan. That's also something that I want to share today, but it just I feel like to me like something that I think doesn't change the major components of the standard. So I think I can just move it to the review status after today's meeting.
All right. I know we have Micah Zolto, but he is on mute. Please signal us. Is there anything we need to get it done from EIP side before moving it to review?
I'm sorry, you're asking a question?
I know. Okay, fine. No, the question was for EIP editor, but I just remember that this is an ERC, so maybe Micah may not have looked into detail of the proposal. However, I will, if you would create a pull request, we can probably bring this to the next Tuesday's meeting discussion, which is EIP editors apprenticeship program, but we generally try to look into the pull request of all ERC category of proposals. And if there are any further feedback, we can share it with you. But it's totally up to Arthur, as far as I understand. If you feel it is ready, please make a pull request.
Sure. Yeah.
All right. Do you have any final question for the group that you would like to get answered before you can make the pull request?
I don't think I have other questions. Yeah, I think there are a lot of comments, but I don't have time to go through all the questions at the moment.
Not a problem. I will try to capture the comment share here in the text chat here in the working document that we are sharing in every meeting agenda, and we'll bring up this EIP in the next meeting for further updates.
Okay, great.
Well, thank you, everyone. This was a nice meeting. I know we did not get the resolution to Trey's comment and Trey's suggestion. Maybe we would hear more about it in the FEM link that is created or in future meeting.
I think I shared most of the points I cared about. I can add more comments into the Ethereum Magicians post, but so I think I'm all set.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It looks like people are divided here. Some may think that there are certain proposals in which getting into details and lower level may be useful. However, there could be certain proposals which may use on the higher level instructions, not getting into the details. So we'll see how proposals are being drafted and proposed, and definitely up to EIP editors to make the decision. Well, thank you all for joining us today, and we hope to have next meeting 2 weeks from today, that is July 25th, the same time. Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.
Thank you. Trey, could you reach out to me on the Ethereum wallet or the ECH Discord so we can chat a little bit more about compacting it, etc.?
Yeah, of course.
Sweet, awesome. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care, everyone.